Listen, I need to get this story off my chest. My name is Ryan Torres, and what happened to me 3 months ago still keeps me up at night. I was working delivery for an app called FreshEats, doing the late shift because the pay was better after 10 p.m. If you've ever done gig work, you know how it is. You take whatever hours pay the most, even if they're not ideal. I'm 24, trying to save money while figuring out what I want to do with my life. I dropped out of community college after 2 years because I couldn't afford to keep going. My plan was to work delivery for a year, save up some cash, then maybe go back to school or start my own business. The job itself was pretty straightforward. Pick up food from restaurants, drive to addresses, hand over orders, collect tips. I worked Thursday nights through Sunday nights, usually from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. The money was decent if you hustled, especially on weekend nights when people were ordering late-night snacks after bars closed. I drove a black Nissan Sentra that I'd bought from my cousin when he moved to Arizona. Nothing fancy, but it was reliable and good on gas. I kept it clean and always had the FreshEats door decals properly displayed. Professional appearance matters when you're representing a company, even as a contractor. My route covered the west side of Denver, everything from downtown lofts to suburban neighborhoods. Some areas were better than others for tips, but I learned which restaurants moved orders quickly and which neighborhoods were safe to deliver to after midnight. The customers were usually pretty normal. College kids ordering pizza, families getting dinner after soccer practice, professionals too tired to cook. Most interactions lasted less than 2 minutes. Hand over food, say thanks, move on to the next delivery. But there was this one address that started giving me problems right from the beginning. It happened on a Thursday in late October. I'd picked up a large order from Mario's Italian Kitchen, 3 entrees and appetizers, going to a house on Elmwood Street in one of the older neighborhoods. Big order meant good tip potential, so I was optimistic. The house was a 2-story colonial style, probably built in the 70s, with a long driveway that curved around some mature oak trees. Nice neighborhood, well-maintained homes, the kind of area where people usually tipped well. I parked in the driveway and grabbed the order. As I walked to the front door, I noticed all the curtains were closed tight, even though it was only 10:30 p.m. The porch had motion sensor lights that clicked on as I approached. I rang the doorbell and waited. After about 30 seconds, I heard movement inside, but nobody came to the door. I rang again and called out that I had a FreshEats delivery. Finally, the door opened, but only about 4 inches. A man's voice spoke from behind the door. "You can leave it on the porch." That was unusual. Most customers want to make sure they get their hot food immediately, not let it sit outside. "I need someone to accept the delivery," I said. "Company policy. Just leave it there. I'll get it in a minute." "Sir, I really need to hand it directly to you or someone in the household." The door opened a bit wider, and I could see part of a middle-aged man with graying hair and thick glasses. He was wearing a dark sweater and had an odd expression, like he was studying me. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ryan, from FreshEats." "Ryan Torres," he said, reading from his phone screen. "Drive the black Nissan." I was surprised he knew my last name since the app usually only shows first names to customers. But maybe the system was different than I thought. "Yeah, that's me. So this is your order from Mario's. $46.50 total." He handed me 3 $20 bills through the gap in the door, which was a decent tip, but instead of taking the food, he just stood there looking at me. "You work late hours," he observed. "Sometimes. Depends on the day. Thursday through Sunday, usually until 3 a.m. That made me uncomfortable. There was no way for him to know my specific work schedule from the app. "Here's your order," I said, holding out the bag. He took it but continued staring at me through the crack in the door. "Be careful driving home, Ryan. Lot of dangerous people out there late at night." I thanked him for the tip and walked back to my car, but something about the encounter felt off. As I backed out of the driveway, I glanced at the house and saw him still standing in the doorway, watching me leave. 2 nights later, I got another order to the same address. Same customer, same restaurant, similar-sized order. The payout was good, so I accepted it without thinking. This time when I arrived, the porch lights were off, leaving the front of the house in darkness. I used my phone's flashlight to find the door and rang the bell. The door opened immediately, like he'd been waiting right behind it. "Hello again, Ryan. Hey, got your order from Mario's. Come inside for a second. I want to show you something." That was a hard no from me. I never went into customers' houses, and this guy already made me nervous. "I can't come inside, but here's your food. $38.25. You sure you can't come in? Just for a minute? Company policy. Sorry." He handed me exact change this time, no tip, and took the food. But before closing the door, he said something that made my skin crawl. "I've been thinking about you since Thursday." I got out of there as quickly as possible, but his words stuck with me. Thinking about me? We'd had maybe a 3-minute interaction 2 days earlier. Why would he be thinking about a delivery driver? When I got home that night, I told my girlfriend Alex about the weird customer. Alex worked customer service for an online retailer and dealt with difficult people regularly. "Some people are just lonely and don't know how to interact normally," she said. "But if he makes you uncomfortable, just don't take orders to that address anymore." That seemed like the obvious solution. The app showed general delivery areas before you accepted orders, so I could just decline anything going to Elmwood Street. But 3 nights later, on Tuesday, I was having a slow shift and needed the money. When an order popped up from a different restaurant going to a different address, but in the same general area, I accepted it without checking the exact street. When I arrived at the address, my heart sank. It was the same house on Elmwood Street. The customer had somehow placed an order using a different address, but it was definitely the same location. This time, when I rang the doorbell, a different person answered. A younger man, maybe in his 20s, opened the door with a friendly smile. "Hey, you must be Ryan. I'm Kevin, Mark's nephew." So the original customer's name was Mark. That was information I didn't have before. "Yeah, I've got your order from Bangkok Garden." "Cool. Mark said you'd been here before. He really likes you." That was an odd thing to say about a delivery driver, but I tried to stay professional. "Great. So this order comes to $29.80. Kevin handed me $35 and told me to keep the change. But as I was handing him the food, he said something that made me freeze. "Mark wanted me to ask if you'd be interested in making some extra money. He has a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" "Nothing weird, just some side work. He owns a few rental properties and needs someone young and reliable to help with maintenance stuff. Good pay, flexible hours." On the surface, it sounded like a legitimate job offer, but something about the timing and the way Kevin presented it felt wrong. "I'm pretty busy with my current work," I said. "Think about it. Mark's a good guy to know in this neighborhood. Lot of influence, if you know what I mean." I thanked him for the tip and left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't really about rental property maintenance. The whole situation felt like I was being recruited for something, but I couldn't figure out what. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention to orders in that area and successfully avoided going back to Elmwood Street. But then something strange started happening. I began noticing the same black SUV behind me during deliveries, always staying a few cars back but making the same turns I was making. At first, I thought it was coincidence, but after seeing the same vehicle 3 nights in a row, I started changing my route randomly to test whether it was actually following me. It was. The SUV would disappear when I made unexpected turns or pulled into gas stations, but it would reappear later in the evening, always maintaining distance but clearly tracking my movements. I tried to get a look at the license plate, but the vehicle stayed too far back and the lighting was too poor to make out the numbers. I could see there was only one person in the SUV, but I couldn't tell if it was Mark or Kevin or someone else entirely. This went on for almost 2 weeks. Every night I worked, the black SUV would appear at some point during my shift and follow me for part of the evening. I started feeling paranoid and constantly checking my mirrors. Finally, I decided to confront the situation directly. On a Saturday night, when I spotted the SUV following me again, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner and called 911. The police arrived within 10 minutes, but by then the SUV was gone. The officer who took my statement was professional but seemed skeptical about the whole thing. Unless someone threatens you directly or tries to harm you, there's not much we can do about a vehicle being on the same roads you're on, he explained. Public roads, freedom of movement, all that. He suggested I document any future incidents with photos or video and advised me to avoid the area where I'd first encountered the problematic customer. That seemed like good advice, and I decided to change my delivery zone entirely. FreshEats allowed drivers to work different areas, so I switched to the east side of Denver, completely away from Elmwood Street and that whole neighborhood. For about a week, everything was normal. No black SUV, no weird customers, just regular delivery work. I started to relax and figured I'd overreacted to what was probably just coincidence. But then Mark found me anyway. I was delivering an order to an apartment complex on the east side, completely outside my old delivery area, when I saw him. He was standing in the parking lot next to a different vehicle, a white pickup truck, just watching me. When he saw that I'd noticed him, he started walking toward me. I was carrying food to the apartment building, but I changed direction and headed back to my car instead. "Ryan," he called out, "wait up, I want to talk to you." I didn't wait. I dropped the food order and ran to my car, but Mark was faster than I expected. He reached my car before I could get inside and put his hand on the driver's side door, preventing me from opening it. "Hey, relax. I just want to offer you that job we talked about." "Get away from my car," I said, trying to stay calm. "You've been avoiding our neighborhood. That's not very friendly." "I don't want any job. Please move away from my car." "The thing is, Ryan, I've invested a lot of time learning about you. Your schedule, your routes, where you live. I'd hate for that investment to go to waste." The way he said "where you live" made my blood turn cold. I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. "Don't do that," Mark said, grabbing my wrist. "Let's just talk like civilized people." I yanked my arm free and pressed send on the call, but Mark didn't run away like I expected. Instead, he smiled and stepped back from my car. "Go ahead and call them. Tell them what crime I've committed. Standing in a public parking lot? Talking to someone? Offering them employment?" He was right. Technically, he hadn't done anything illegal. Creepy and threatening, yes, but not criminal. "This ends now," I said. "Stop following me. Stop coming to my deliveries. Leave me alone." "Or what?" "Or I'll get a restraining order." Mark laughed. "On what grounds?" "That I offered you a job twice and happened to be in the same area where you work. Good luck with that." The police arrived a few minutes later, but just like the officer the week before, they couldn't do much. Mark was polite and cooperative, claimed he was just trying to offer me legitimate work, and denied following me or making any threats. After the police left, Mark approached me one more time. "This could all be very simple, Ryan. I'm offering you good money for easy work. But if you keep making things complicated, well, things might get complicated for you too." That was clearly a threat, but he'd been careful to phrase it ambiguously. Nothing the police could act on, but the message was clear. I quit FreshEats the next day. I couldn't afford to quit, but I also couldn't afford to keep putting myself in situations where Mark could find me. I found a different job working stock at a warehouse during day shifts, completely different schedule and location. For about a month, I thought I was free. No more encounters with Mark. No more black SUVs or white pickup trucks following me. I started to believe the whole thing was over. But then Alex started noticing things. "There's been a guy sitting in a car outside our apartment building," she told me one evening. "Different car each time, but it's always someone just sitting there for hours." My heart sank. Mark hadn't given up. He'd just changed tactics. "Did you get a look at him?" "Hard to tell from 4 stories up, but he seems to be watching our building specifically. And Ryan, I think he's been following me too." That crossed a line that filled me with rage. It was one thing for Mark to harass me, but involving Alex was unacceptable. "We need to call the police again." "And tell them what? That someone's legally parked on a public street? They already told you they can't do anything unless he commits an actual crime." Alex was right, but I couldn't just do nothing while Mark escalated his harassment to include her. That night, I sat by our apartment window with a camera, waiting to see if anyone was watching our building. Around midnight, a dark sedan pulled up across the street and parked under a broken streetlight where the driver would be hard to see. I took photos of the vehicle and the license plate, then called 911 and reported a suspicious person conducting surveillance on our building. The police responded, approached the vehicle, and found Mark inside with binoculars and a notebook. When they searched the notebook, they found detailed observations about my schedule, Alex's schedule, and our daily routines. That was enough for them to arrest him on charges of stalking and harassment. The investigation revealed that Mark had been monitoring me for over 2 months, following me to work, learning my personal information, and documenting my movements. They found similar notebooks for several other young men who delivered food to his house over the past year. It turned out Mark had a history of this behavior going back several years. He would identify delivery drivers or service workers he found appealing, then begin a gradual process of harassment and intimidation designed to force them into some kind of relationship with him. The job offer was just his standard approach to try to get young men alone in private settings. Previous victims had reported being pressured into increasingly uncomfortable situations once they accepted his offers of work. Mark pleaded guilty to stalking charges and was sentenced to 18 months in jail, followed by 3 years of probation. He was also required to undergo psychological counseling and was prohibited from ordering food delivery to his home. But the experience changed how I think about personal safety in ways that go beyond just delivery work. I learned that predators often start with very small boundary violations before escalating to more serious harassment. Mark's initial questions about my schedule and comments about my personal life were testing my responses and gathering information for future use. I also learned that it's important to trust your instincts even when you can't point to specific threatening behavior. From the very first delivery to Mark's house, something felt wrong, but I ignored that feeling because I needed the money and couldn't articulate exactly what was bothering me. Now I know that feeling uncomfortable around someone is often your subconscious detecting danger signals that your conscious mind hasn't fully processed. If someone makes you feel uneasy, if their questions seem too personal, if they show excessive interest in your life or schedule, those are warning signs worth paying attention to. I've gone back to delivery work, but with different companies and in different areas of the city. I'm much more careful about noting customer behavior and trusting my gut feelings about situations that don't seem right. I also learned the importance of documenting harassment and reporting it to authorities even when it doesn't seem like they can do much immediately. The notebook the police found in Mark's car became crucial evidence in his prosecution, but if I hadn't called them that final night, they never would have discovered it. Most importantly, I learned that you don't have to tolerate harassment or uncomfortable situations just because you need the money or don't want to seem paranoid. Your safety is worth more than any tip, any job, any income. Mark was released from jail 8 months ago. As part of his probation, he's not allowed to contact me or Alex, and he can't live within a certain distance of our neighborhood. But I know that probation doesn't last forever, and people like Mark don't usually change their fundamental behavior just because they've been punished. The experience with Mark taught me lessons that extended far beyond just delivery work. When I started working at the warehouse, I thought I'd left all the danger behind, but I quickly realized that the skills I'd learned for recognizing predatory behavior were applicable in many situations. During my first week at the warehouse, there was this supervisor named Gary who reminded me immediately of Mark. He would ask personal questions about my living situation, my girlfriend, my financial situation. He'd make comments about young workers needing guidance and protection. He'd offer to give me rides home or invite me to have drinks after work. All of it felt familiar in the worst possible way. But this time, instead of ignoring my instincts like I had with Mark, I documented every inappropriate interaction and reported Gary to Human Resources within 2 weeks of starting the job. It turned out that Gary had a history of inappropriate behavior with younger male employees. HR had received multiple complaints over the years, but they'd never had anyone document the behavior as thoroughly as I did. Gary was terminated, and the company implemented new training programs for supervisors. That experience taught me that the skills I'd developed for protecting myself weren't just useful for delivery work. Predators exist in every environment, and they often use similar tactics regardless of the setting. I also learned more about Mark's background during the legal proceedings. The prosecutor assigned to the case, District Attorney Sarah Kim, explained that Mark fit a specific profile of predator that law enforcement was seeing more frequently. He's what we call an opportunistic predator, she told me during one of our meetings. He doesn't necessarily set out to harm people, but he sees vulnerable individuals and can't resist trying to manipulate and control them. Mark had been targeting delivery drivers, service workers, and other gig economy employees because they were often young, financially stressed, and working alone. These factors made them more likely to tolerate inappropriate behavior in order to keep earning money. People like Mark study their victims carefully, District Attorney Kim explained. They learn schedules, habits, vulnerabilities. They start with small boundary violations to test responses and gradually escalate until they have significant control over their targets. The investigation into Mark's activities revealed that I wasn't his only victim during the time he was harassing me. There were at least 3 other delivery drivers who'd been receiving similar treatment, though none of them had reported it to police. One of those drivers was a 19-year-old college student named David Chen, who worked for a different delivery company. David had been getting increasingly uncomfortable orders from Mark, requests for him to come inside the house, offers of cash payments outside the app, suggestions that they meet up when David wasn't working. David had mentioned the weird customer to his manager, but the company's response was just to suggest that he decline orders from that address if it made him uncomfortable. No investigation, no documentation, no warning to other drivers. Another victim was a 22-year-old named Miguel Santos, who worked for yet another delivery company. Miguel's experience was almost identical to mine, starting with personal questions and escalating to offers of side work and surveillance of his daily activities. Miguel had actually accepted one of Mark's job offers and spent an afternoon helping with what Mark claimed was maintenance work at a rental property. But instead of legitimate work, Mark had spent the time asking personal questions, taking photos of Miguel without permission, and making increasingly inappropriate comments. When Miguel tried to leave, Mark had offered him significant money to stay longer and become a regular employee. When Miguel declined, Mark had begun the same pattern of surveillance and harassment that I'd experienced. Miguel never reported the incident because he was in the country on a student visa and was afraid that any involvement with police might jeopardize his immigration status. It wasn't until Mark was arrested for stalking me that Miguel came forward with his story. The third victim, a 20-year-old named Brandon Williams, had endured months of harassment before finally changing jobs and moving to a different part of the city to escape Mark's attention. Brandon's experience had been the most extensive and disturbing. Mark had managed to get Brandon's personal phone number and had been sending text messages at all hours. He'd been showing up at places where Brandon worked, ate, and socialized. He'd even contacted Brandon's family members on social media, claiming to be a concerned friend. When police searched Mark's house during the investigation, they found extensive files on all 4 of us, plus several other young men who'd apparently been previous targets. Each file contained photographs taken without consent, detailed notes about daily routines, personal information gathered from social media, and what appeared to be psychological profiles analyzing our vulnerabilities and likely responses to different types of manipulation. The scope of Mark's operation was far more sophisticated and disturbing than any of us had realized while we were experiencing it individually. District Attorney Kim used our cases to advocate for stronger legal protections for gig economy workers. She pointed out that traditional workplace harassment laws didn't apply to contractors and freelancers, leaving millions of workers vulnerable to the kind of predatory behavior Mark had demonstrated. These workers are often young, financially vulnerable, and isolated, she explained to a legislative committee studying worker protection laws. They're ideal targets for predators, but they have fewer legal protections than traditional employees. As a result of the advocacy that grew out of Mark's case, Colorado passed new laws specifically addressing harassment of gig workers. The legislation requires companies to provide better reporting mechanisms for inappropriate customer behavior and mandates that they share information about problematic customers across platforms. I testified in favor of the legislation, sharing my experience and explaining how the lack of adequate reporting systems had allowed Mark to target multiple victims across different companies without any company recognizing the pattern. If these companies had been communicating with each other about Mark's behavior, he could have been stopped much earlier, I told the committee. Instead, he was able to move from victim to victim, platform to platform with no consequences. The new laws also require gig economy companies to provide safety training for their workers and to maintain databases of customers who've been reported for inappropriate behavior. It's not a perfect solution, but it's progress, and it means that future victims will have more resources and protections than we had. I also became involved with a nonprofit organization called Gig Worker Safety Alliance that provides education and advocacy for people working in the gig economy. The organization was founded by other people who'd experienced harassment or violence while working delivery, rideshare, or other gig jobs. Through the alliance, I learned that Mark's tactics were disturbingly common. Predators targeting delivery drivers, using food orders as a way to initiate contact, offering side work to get victims into private settings, conducting surveillance to learn personal information. It's a pattern that occurs regularly across the country. The Alliance has documented hundreds of similar cases, most of which never result in arrests or prosecutions because the harassment stops just short of clearly illegal activity. Predators like Mark are very sophisticated, explained Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a criminologist who studies crimes against gig workers. They understand exactly where the line is between legal and illegal behavior, and they're careful not to cross it until they're confident they can control the situation. Dr. Martinez's research shows that gig workers are particularly vulnerable to this type of predatory behavior because they work alone, often at night, and are economically motivated to tolerate inappropriate customer behavior. Traditional employees have supervisors, co-workers, and HR departments to help them recognize and report harassment, she explained. Gig workers are isolated and often don't have clear reporting mechanisms or support systems. The Alliance has developed training programs to help gig workers recognize warning signs of predatory behavior and respond appropriately. The training covers things like identifying inappropriate questions, documenting harassment, understanding legal options, and prioritizing personal safety over income. I've presented this training to new driver orientation sessions for several delivery companies. It's rewarding work, knowing that I'm helping other people avoid the kind of experience I went through. But the most important part of the training is teaching people to trust their instincts. Almost every victim I've spoken with, including myself, knew something was wrong long before the harassment escalated to clearly dangerous levels. If a customer makes you uncomfortable, there's usually a good reason. I always tell new drivers, you don't need to be able to articulate exactly what's wrong. Trust your gut and remove yourself from the situation. I also teach practical safety measures that can help protect gig workers. Things like sharing your location with friends or family members while working, documenting inappropriate customer behavior, varying your routes and schedules when possible, and having emergency contacts readily available. Most importantly, I teach people that they have the right to prioritize their safety over customer satisfaction or company policies. No amount of money is worth being harassed, stalked, or put in danger. The Gig Worker Safety Alliance has also been working with law enforcement agencies to help them understand the unique challenges that gig workers face. Many police officers aren't familiar with how gig work operates and don't understand the vulnerabilities that come with this type of employment. We've developed informational materials for police departments explaining how gig work functions, what types of crimes are commonly committed against gig workers, and how officers can better respond to reports of harassment or stalking in gig work contexts. The response from law enforcement has been generally positive. Most officers want to help, but they often don't understand the specific dynamics of gig work harassment. Traditional stalking often involves people who know each other personally, explained Detective Lisa Thompson, who now specializes in crimes against gig workers. But gig work stalking usually starts with strangers who use the work relationship to initiate contact and gather personal information. Detective Thompson worked on Mark's case and has since become an advocate for better training on gig worker safety issues. We've learned that we need to take these cases seriously even when the behavior seems relatively minor, she said. What might look like just an overly friendly customer to an officer who doesn't understand gig work dynamics could actually be the beginning of a serious stalking situation. The Alliance has also been working with gig economy companies to improve their safety features and reporting systems. Some companies have been more responsive than others, but there's been gradual progress across the industry. Most major delivery platforms now have better incident reporting systems, panic buttons for drivers, and policies for sharing information about problematic customers. Some companies have also implemented real-time location sharing features that allow drivers to automatically share their location with emergency contacts. But there's still a long way to go. Many companies are reluctant to invest heavily in safety features because they add costs and complexity to their operations. And the legal protections for gig workers are still much weaker than those for traditional employees. That's why the advocacy work continues to be important. Every new law, every improved safety feature, every additional protection for gig workers makes the next Mark a little less likely to succeed. Alex and I are still together, though the experience with Mark changed our relationship in some ways. She became much more security conscious and started taking self-defense classes. We moved to a different apartment in a building with better security features. Alex also became involved with the Gig Worker Safety Alliance, focusing specifically on the impact of gig worker harassment on family members and romantic partners. Predators don't just target the workers themselves, she explained during one of her presentations. They often extend their harassment to include family members as a way of increasing pressure and control. Her work has helped the Alliance develop resources for family members of gig workers who experience harassment, including safety planning and support services. We talk sometimes about whether I should have just given up delivery work after the first uncomfortable encounter with Mark. In hindsight, it might have been the safer choice. But I'm glad I didn't, because if I had just disappeared from Mark's radar, he would have moved on to other victims who might not have been as prepared to recognize and document his behavior. By staying in the situation long enough to gather evidence and build a legal case, we were able to stop Mark and potentially prevent him from harassing other people in the future. That doesn't mean I recommend that approach to everyone. Safety should always be the top priority, and there's no shame in removing yourself from a dangerous situation as quickly as possible. But in my case, staying engaged long enough to build a legal case led to a prosecution that protected other potential victims and contributed to broader changes in laws and policies. I still do delivery work occasionally, usually just on weekends or when I need extra money for something specific. But now I work for companies that have better safety features and reporting systems, and I'm much more selective about which orders I accept. I also stay involved with the Gig Worker Safety Alliance and continue to speak about my experience at safety trainings and legislative hearings. Mark's probation ends next year. When that happens, he'll be free to move wherever he wants and resume his previous behavior patterns. That's something I think about sometimes, but I try not to let it control my life. I've learned that you can't completely eliminate risk from your life, but you can develop the skills and awareness to recognize danger and respond appropriately. That's what I try to teach other gig workers, and it's what I try to practice in my own life. The experience with Mark was terrifying and traumatic, but it also taught me valuable lessons about personal safety, trusting my instincts, and advocating for myself and others. Most importantly, it taught me that silence protects predators. By speaking out about what happened to me, by documenting the harassment, by working with other victims and advocates, we were able to stop one predator and create systems that might prevent future victims. That's why I'm sharing this story, not to scare people away from gig work, but to help them recognize warning signs and protect themselves when those warning signs appear. If you work in the gig economy, or if you know someone who does, please remember that you have the right to feel safe at work. You don't have to tolerate harassment, inappropriate questions, or behavior that makes you uncomfortable. Trust your instincts. Document anything that seems wrong, and don't be afraid to prioritize your safety over money or customer satisfaction. And if you find yourself in a situation like mine, remember that you're not alone. There are resources available. There are people who understand what you're going through, and there are ways to protect yourself and stop predatory behavior. My name is Ryan Torres, and I survived Mark's harassment by learning to trust my instincts and refusing to prioritize money over my personal safety. If you take nothing else from my story, please remember that your safety is worth more than any tip, any rating, any amount of money. You have the right to feel safe at work, and you have the power to protect yourself. Let me tell you about some of the other cases the Gig Worker Safety Alliance has dealt with, because Mark's story isn't unique. Understanding these patterns can help you recognize when you might be dealing with a predator. There was a case in Phoenix involving a rideshare driver named Maria Gonzalez. She started getting repeated ride requests from the same passenger, always late at night, always to isolated locations. The passenger would ask personal questions during rides, comment on her appearance, and eventually started requesting her phone number for direct bookings outside the app. When Maria declined, the passenger began leaving negative ratings and false complaints, trying to get her deactivated from the platform. He also started requesting rides just to cancel them when other drivers arrived, apparently trying to force the app to assign him to Maria specifically. The harassment escalated to the point where the passenger was requesting rides to Maria's own neighborhood, even though he lived across the city. He would have the rides end near her apartment building and then linger in the area. Maria documented everything and reported it to both the rideshare company and local police. But like many of these cases, it took months to build enough evidence for legal action. The passenger was eventually arrested for stalking and harassment, but not before Maria had lost significant income from the stress and fear of continuing to work. Her case led to policy changes at several rideshare companies, including better systems for blocking problematic passengers and more support for drivers experiencing harassment. Another case involved a grocery delivery driver in Atlanta named James Park. James was delivering to an upscale neighborhood when he encountered a customer who seemed overly interested in his personal life. The customer, a woman in her 40s, started requesting James specifically for deliveries by timing her orders for when he was working and complaining when other drivers showed up. She began offering him cash tips outside the app and inviting him inside her house. When James maintained professional boundaries, the customer escalated her behavior. She started ordering items she didn't need just to get him to come to her house. She began following him on social media and showing up at grocery stores where he was picking up orders for other customers. The situation became dangerous when the customer started making false accusations about James's behavior, claiming to the delivery company that he had been inappropriate with her. These false reports could have cost James his job and damaged his reputation. Fortunately, James had been documenting all of his interactions with the customer, including saving text messages and keeping records of her unusual ordering patterns. When the delivery company investigated her complaints, the evidence clearly showed that she had been the one engaging in inappropriate behavior. The customer was banned from the platform, but the experience left James feeling vulnerable and distrustful of customers who seemed overly friendly. These cases illustrate how predatory behavior in the gig economy often follows similar patterns regardless of the specific type of work involved. Predators exploit the service relationship to initiate contact. They test boundaries with small violations, they gather personal information, and they escalate their behavior when they don't get the response they want. Understanding these patterns has helped the Alliance develop training materials that apply across different types of gig work. Whether you're delivering food, driving passengers, shopping for groceries, or providing other services, the warning signs are remarkably consistent. One of the most important things we teach in our training sessions is the concept of professional boundaries. Many gig workers, especially those who are new to the work, feel pressured to be overly accommodating to customers in order to maintain high ratings and ensure tips. But maintaining professional boundaries isn't just about being comfortable, it's about safety. Predators often test boundaries specifically to identify victims who are unlikely to resist or report inappropriate behavior. If a customer asks where you live, you don't have to answer. I always tell people in training sessions, if someone wants your personal phone number, you can decline. If a customer invites you into their home, you can say no. These boundaries aren't rude, they're professional. We also teach people how to recognize the difference between normal, friendly conversation and information gathering that could be used for predatory purposes. Normal customer conversation might include comments about the weather, questions about delivery times, or general pleasantries. Information gathering sounds different. Questions about your work schedule, your living situation, your financial circumstances, your relationship status. These are red flags. Customers who remember unusual details about your personal life from previous interactions, who ask to contact you outside the work platform, or who seem to be testing your willingness to bend rules are exhibiting concerning behavior. The Alliance has also worked with researchers to better understand the psychology behind gig work predation. Dr. Michael Torres, a forensic psychologist who studies predatory behavior, has helped us understand why gig workers are particularly attractive targets. Gig workers are often young, financially motivated, and socially isolated during their work. Dr. Torres explained, these factors make them ideal targets for predators who understand how to exploit economic vulnerability and social isolation. Dr. Torres's research shows that predators who target gig workers often have experience with other forms of predatory behavior. They understand how to gradually escalate inappropriate behavior while staying just below the threshold of clearly illegal activity. They're very good at reading people and identifying those who are less likely to report inappropriate behavior, he said. They look for people who seem eager to please, who are financially stressed, or who appear to have limited support systems. This research has helped inform the Alliance's advocacy work with policymakers. We've been able to demonstrate that gig work predation isn't just a series of isolated incidents, but a systematic form of exploitation that requires coordinated response. One of the most significant policy victories we've achieved is the passage of gig worker protection laws in several states. These laws require companies to provide better safety training, maintain databases of problematic customers, and offer support services for workers who experience harassment. But policy change is slow, and in the meantime, individual workers need practical tools for protecting themselves. That's why the Alliance has developed a comprehensive safety app specifically for gig workers. The app includes features like real-time location sharing, emergency contacts, incident reporting, and a database of safety tips for different types of gig work. The app also includes a feature that allows workers to anonymously report problematic customers, creating a crowdsourced database of warning signs and concerning behavior patterns. If multiple workers report the same customer for inappropriate behavior, even if each individual incident seems minor, the pattern becomes visible, explained Dr. Lisa Chen, the technology director who helped develop the app. The app has been downloaded by over 50,000 gig workers across the country and has been used to report thousands of safety incidents. Some of the reports have led to criminal investigations, but more importantly, the data has helped workers identify and avoid dangerous situations before they escalate. The app has also been valuable for researchers studying gig work safety. The anonymized data shows patterns of predatory behavior that weren't visible when incidents were reported individually to different companies. We're seeing clear geographic clusters of problematic behavior, Dr. Chen explained. Certain neighborhoods, certain types of addresses, certain customer profiles that are associated with higher rates of inappropriate behavior. This data has helped the Alliance work with law enforcement agencies to identify areas that need increased attention and patrols. It's also helped gig economy companies understand the scope of the problem and invest in better safety features. But individual safety awareness remains the most important factor in preventing victimization. That's why I continue to share my story and participate in safety training sessions. Every time I speak to a group of new gig workers, I see recognition in some faces. People who've had uncomfortable experiences but weren't sure if they should be concerned. After one training session in Denver, a young woman approached me to describe a customer who had been making her uncomfortable. The customer had been ordering food delivery almost daily and always requesting her specifically. He'd been asking personal questions, commenting on her appearance, and offering her money to stay and chat after deliveries. She'd been tolerating the behavior because the customer tipped well and she needed the money. But after hearing my story, she realized that the customer's behavior followed the same pattern that Mark had used with me. She reported the customer to her delivery company and stopped accepting orders from his address. A few weeks later, she learned that another driver had reported the same customer for similar behavior. The delivery company investigated and discovered that the customer had been systematically targeting young female drivers across multiple platforms. He was banned from all major delivery services in the area. That woman's willingness to speak up and report inappropriate behavior potentially prevented the situation from escalating to something more dangerous. Stories like that remind me why this advocacy work is important. It's not just about preventing the extreme cases like what happened to me. It's about creating a culture where inappropriate behavior is recognized and reported early, before it can escalate. The Alliance has documented hundreds of cases where early intervention prevented situations from becoming dangerous. Workers who trusted their instincts, reported concerning behavior, and prioritized their safety over financial considerations. But we've also documented cases where workers ignored warning signs and suffered serious consequences as a result. One case involved a food delivery driver in Miami who ignored multiple red flags from a customer because the tips were exceptionally good. The customer eventually assaulted the driver and held him captive for several hours before the driver was able to escape and call police. Another case involved a rideshare driver in Seattle who continued picking up a passenger despite increasingly inappropriate behavior because she felt sorry for him and thought he was just lonely. The passenger eventually sexually assaulted her. These cases are tragic, but they also provide important lessons about the danger of ignoring instincts and prioritizing financial considerations over personal safety. Predators often use money as a tool of manipulation, Dr. Torres explained. They understand that many gig workers are financially vulnerable, so they offer exceptional tips or payments to encourage workers to tolerate inappropriate behavior. This is why the Alliance emphasizes that no amount of money is worth compromising your safety. It can be tempting to continue serving a customer who tips well, even if their behavior makes you uncomfortable, but that's exactly what predators are counting on. The Alliance has also worked to address the financial pressures that make gig workers vulnerable to exploitation. We've advocated for better base pay rates, more transparent fee structures, and policies that protect workers from retaliation when they report safety concerns. Some progress has been made, but there's still a long way to go. Many gig workers still feel pressured to tolerate inappropriate behavior in order to maintain their income. That's why education and awareness remain so important. The more workers understand about predatory behavior patterns, the better equipped they are to recognize and respond to dangerous situations. Alex and I have been together for 3 years now, and the experience with Mark has actually strengthened our relationship in many ways. We learned to communicate better about safety concerns, to support each other through difficult situations, and to advocate for ourselves and others. Alex's work with the Alliance has focused on helping family members and partners of gig workers understand the unique safety challenges of this type of work. Many people don't realize how vulnerable gig workers can be or how to provide appropriate support when safety issues arise. Family members often want to tell gig workers to just quit if they're having safety problems, Alex explained, but that's not always financially realistic, and it doesn't address the systemic issues that make this work dangerous. Instead, Alex teaches family members how to help with safety planning, documentation of incidents, and emotional support during difficult situations. She's also worked with the Alliance to develop resources for partners and family members who are indirectly affected by gig work harassment. When someone you love is being stalked or harassed, it affects your life too, she said. You might change your own routines, feel anxious about their safety, or struggle with how to provide support. These resources have been valuable for many families dealing with gig work safety issues. Looking back on the experience with Mark, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd handled things differently. What if I'd reported his behavior earlier? What if I'd trusted my instincts from the first delivery? But I try not to spend too much time on those questions. The important thing is that we were able to stop Mark's behavior and use the experience to help protect other people. Mark's case also led to broader awareness about the vulnerabilities that gig workers face. Media coverage of the story prompted other victims to come forward and helped educate the public about these issues. Several documentary filmmakers have contacted me about telling the story more broadly, and I'm considering participating in projects that could help raise awareness about gig worker safety. The goal isn't to scare people away from gig work, but to help them understand the risks and take appropriate precautions. Gig work can be a valuable source of income and flexibility for many people, but like any work that involves interacting with strangers, it requires awareness and preparation. The Alliance continues to grow and expand its programs. We now have chapters in over 30 cities and have trained thousands of gig workers in safety awareness and incident reporting. We've also expanded our advocacy work to include other issues affecting gig workers like wage theft, unsafe working conditions, and discrimination. But safety remains our core focus because nothing else matters if workers aren't safe. Mark's probation ends in 6 months. When that happens, he'll be free to resume his previous behavior patterns. That's something I think about sometimes, but I try not to let it control my life. I've taken self-defense classes, I stay aware of my surroundings, and I maintain the safety practices I learned through this experience. But I also know that I can't completely eliminate risk from my life. What I can do is continue working to make gig work safer for everyone, continue sharing my story to help other people recognize warning signs, and continue advocating for policies that protect vulnerable workers. The experience with Mark was terrifying and traumatic, but it also opened my eyes to issues I'd never considered before. It connected me with a community of advocates and survivors who are working to create positive change. Most importantly, it taught me that speaking out about difficult experiences can help prevent other people from going through similar trauma. That's why I'm sharing this story with you, not to frighten you, but to prepare you, to help you recognize warning signs, trust your instincts, and prioritize your safety. If you work in the gig economy, please remember that you have rights and resources. You don't have to tolerate harassment or inappropriate behavior. You have the power to protect yourself and help protect others. And if you find yourself in a situation like mine, remember that you're not alone. There are people who understand what you're going through, organizations that can help, and ways to stop predatory behavior. My name is Ryan Torres, and I survived Mark's harassment by learning to trust my instincts, document inappropriate behavior, and prioritize my safety over financial considerations. If you remember nothing else from my story, please remember that your safety is worth more than any amount of money. Trust your instincts, speak up when something feels wrong, and never hesitate to remove yourself from a situation that makes you uncomfortable. You have the right to feel safe at work, and you have the power to protect yourself and others.